Pak Dekan, thank you. Mas Amni, maybe we can start.
Yes, Mas, please.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I greet you from Semarang, from my house, as we all are mostly, and welcome to guest lecturer with our esteemed guest here, Professor Lana Sebastian from RSIS. With our theme today is the role of TNI or Indonesian Armed Force in the Indonesian administration system during the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically, we are going to discuss about how basically the roles of TNI or our armed forces, our military force, in order to tackle the challenges that the pandemic has bring upon us. So, Mas Hamni, do we start directly right now, or? Okay then.
Yes, Mas.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, please, Naya.
Okay. Miss Naya, please.
Okay, sir. Okay, good morning and welcome to our webinar and guest lectures about the role of Indonesian Armed Force in the Indonesian administrative system during the COVID-19 pandemic with Professor Leonard Sebastian from Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University and Mr. Satya as moderator. Leonard Sebastian is Associate Professor and Coordinator of the Indonesian Program of the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Okay, don't forget to turn your camera, guys. Jangan lupa menyalakan kamera ya, teman-teman. Mr. Satya, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Naya. Okay, so let me start introducing myself. I'm Satyika Parama Satya. You may call me Satya. I'm a lecturer from the Department of International Relations, Universitas Diponegoro, and I'm going to be your moderator today for this session with Professor Leonard Sebastian. Prof. Leonard, again, really nice to see you. We hope you are really having a good time there. And it's a shame that we cannot have you here directly in our campus because we kind of miss this kind of things. This kind of seminar, but we have to, somehow survive and release the challenge of still keeping the academics live by doing all of this online, So I'm going to start by reading Prof. Leonard's short bio. So Leonard C. Sebastian is Associate Professor and Coordinator of the Indonesia program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS. Oh yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I forget that we have to greet our esteemed dean as well. I'm going to give the time to Pak Hardi Warsono as our dean of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at Undip. Pak Hardi, please, the floor is yours.
Oke, thank you, Mr. Satya. Kenapa lupa dengan dekan?
Maaf adegan agak terlalu bersemangat.
Ya, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam, Om Swastiastu, Namo Salam, Namo Buddhaya. Salam kebajikan buat kita semuanya. Honorable Manager at the Department of Public Administration, Dr. Tri Yuningsih, MSc, Head of Department, Dr. Anda Tri Yuningsih, MSc, Head of Study Program of Public Administration, Mr. Amni Jarkasi Rahman, SIP MSc, Secretary of Study Program of Public Administration, Honorable Speakers and Moderator, Profesor Leonard C. Sebastian, PhD, Satwika Paramasatya, SIP MA, Department of International Relations, distinguished guests, Professor, kolega, committees, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at Universitas Diponegoro, I would like to kindly welcome you all to our webinar series today, held by Department of Public Administration. I feel excited and privileged to have the opportunity to open and present this highly academic program to all of us. Even though the world is still facing crisis due to the disease caused by COVID-19. Thanks to the technology and advancement, we are still able to organize many academic programs through digital medium and platform. Ladies and gentlemen, speaking of pandemic, hundreds of millions of people have contracted COVID-19, and many have become the victim of this deadly virus. Under no circumstance should keep our guard, and by since the virus has continued to spread and harm our life and society in many different dimensions. The rampant spread of the pandemic globally has demanded us to unite more than ever to fully cooperate on each and every front possible so that we could come up with real solution to tackle the tragic issue. Indonesian government understand this essence of has been incorporating many lines to combat the virus nationally, one of which has been the Indonesian Army, whose primary task in the ensure the adoption of governmental emergencies measures in province and local region through the country. It would be intriguing to understand how foreign experts are evaluating or having an opinion on Indonesia's strategy and involving its national guard against the pandemic, and for such a purpose, we have invited the great friend of VISIP, Professor Leonard C. Sebastian, PhD, to provide us with his commentaries and views on this matter. Before we proceed the main event, I would like to use this occasion to express my gratitude to Professor Leonard, who has provided unparalleled support to many programs and development organized by our faculty. Professor Leonard has been always very welcoming toward many initiatives and attending our invitations in 2015. Okay, distributing his ideas and sharing strategic view on many important topics about Indonesia, Singapore, and Islam. Despite his time constraint and highly occupied schedule. So thank you very much, Professor Leonard, for your time and hospitality. We truly appreciate them. Had we not been under pandemic, I would have invited you myself to a big lunch of sate kempleng maybe later today after your session maybe. In the meantime, maybe we could just stay at home and live in healthy diet to lower our cholesterol level before returning to enjoy this year in Semarang and also in Singapore after the pandemic and hopefully soon. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, please do allow to end this remark by wishing you all the delivery information, informative talk and discussion with Professor Leonard. By saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, webinar today saya nyatakan resmi dibuka. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much for the appealing remarks, Pak Hadi. And that invitation about sate kempleng sounds really delicious, yeah, Pak Leonard. Too bad that we could not have it right now, but then hopefully things will change for the better really soon. Thank you again, Pak Hardi, for the remarks. It gave us a glimpse about what we are going to discuss about today. So again, I'm going to kick us off by reading Prof. Leonard C. Sebastian's short bio. So, Leonard C. Sebastian is Associate Professor and Coordinator of the Indonesia program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And he is currently co-editing a special issue of the peer-reviewed Journal of Asian Security and International Affairs on the theme Indonesia's Foreign and Maritime Policies, Domestic and External Determinants for publications in 2021. Having completed a 5-year scholarship bond at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, where he served as fellow from February 1995 to September 2000, Associate Professor Sebastian joined RSIS, or as it was then called, the Institute of Defense and Strategic Studies as Senior Fellow in October 2000. He received his PhD from the Australian National University in 1997, where he was affiliated to the Strategic and Defense Studies Center. In 2007, Dr. Sebastian participated in the inaugural program of the Presidential Friends of Indonesia, hosted by Kementerian Luar Negeri Republik Indonesia from 2008 to 2010. He served as consultant to Kementerian Pertahanan Republik Indonesia, advising on the establishment of the Indonesian Defense University, or UNHAN, Universitas Pertahanan. And finally, since 2002, he has served as a member of the advisory panel to the Government Parliament Committee on Defense and Foreign Affairs. He lectures regularly at various government and security agencies, both in Singapore and abroad. And I would love to also point out that Prof. Leonard has been a regular keynote speaker for our Sistem International Conference, ICSP, from the very first time, 2016, where I was the chair. Pak Leonard, thank you very much for all this time. Okay, then we're just going to start off by listening to what Prof. Leonard has to say and share, and his commentaries about the issues at matters in hand. Please, Prof. Leonard, the floor is yours.
Terima kasih banyak, Pak Sadwika. Terima kasih juga pada Mbak Ayu dan Pak Amrin. Selamat pagi, Bapak Hadi Warsono, selaku Dekan Fakultas Ilmu Sosial dan Ilmu Politik Universitas Diponegoro, tamu undangan dan rekan-rekan yang saya hormati. Saya berterima kasih atas undangan untuk berbicara dan berbagi pengetahuan tentang sejauh mana peran TNI sebagai organisasi militer dalam penanganan COVID-19 di Indonesia. Walaupun saya sebenarnya lebih senang untuk hadir di Semarang secara langsung, akan tetapi situasi sangat tidak mendukung hal tersebut untuk direalisasikan. Ya, topik yang akan saya bicarakan hari ini ya sangat menarik sekali untuk didiskusikan karena Indonesia sedang mengalami situasi yang sulit, khususnya dalam menekan persebaran infeksi virus dalam konteks wilayah geografis yang luas. Ketidakmampuan lembaga sipil dalam merespon pandemi ini akhirnya mendorong pemerintah untuk berkolaborasi dengan TNI yang memiliki kapasitas organisasi dan sumber daya manusia yang memadai. Untuk itu, saya harap apa yang akan saya sampaikan ini dapat menjadi ilmu yang bermanfaat bagi rekan-rekan sekalian. Jika nanti terdapat pertanyaan setelah sesi presentasi, mohon untuk tidak segan bertanya. Okey. Ya, sekarang saya mulai presentasi saya di dalam bahasa Inggris. Ya, saya harap ada waktu untuk makan di sati sapi Pak Kempling ya di kapan waktu yang baik untuk ya, saya harap situasi di Singapura dan di Indonesia menjadi situasi yang lebih baik.
Ya. Sate Pak Kempleng, lumpia, bandeng presto, and so
Iya,
on.
betul. Semua yang baik, Pak. I miss Semarang very much. It is such a beautiful city located in such a beautiful part of Indonesia. Semarang is so blessed. There is the pantai and also ada gunung juga. So keadaannya ya indah permai. And I always enjoy visiting Jawa Tengah because such a wonderful historical part of Indonesia. There's so much to learn about not just Indonesia but also Javanese culture, which I enjoy studying and enjoy learning. Sometimes maybe some people say to me, "Oh, you are becoming like very much like orang Jawa, but I guess that is because it's so difficult to come to Indonesia so often and not appreciate all the many cultures of Indonesia, not just Javanese culture, So I hope through this these are great opportunities for us to get to also know each other better. Singaporeans need to learn more and understand more about Indonesia, and of course also Indonesians need to understand Singapore, how we have developed, how we have evolved, so that we can work together and cooperate better. And I hope the pandemic will be just another example of the great relationship that Singapore and Indonesia enjoys. Let me now begin with my presentation. I've already circulated the slide, so perhaps but Ayu, can please start with slide 1. We can or shall I share the slide? Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, slide 1, please. Ya, terima kasih Pak Amni. Thank you. Okay, when we think about the history of the TNI's involvement in Indonesia's system of administration, I think the first starting point for us is to understand the long history of involvement of the TNI in the politics of Indonesia. But we must also remember that the evolution of the TNI's role in Indonesia's politics has evolved over many decades. There is no one period of time that I would say is definitive of the TNI's role in Indonesian society. Yeah? I mean, we have to look at it in different periods, from the 1950s, to the New Order era, and then, of course, the Reformasi period. In this context, what happens is it allows us to understand the TNI's evolution as Indonesia evolves. Okay, so it's very important when we think about Order Lama, Order Baru, and Zaman Reformasi. When we must be fair to the TNI when we study these periods. We cannot always look back and say, oh, the TNI is always this way, So we must also think in terms of how the organization has changed, but we also must think in terms of society's interactions with its institutions, that will help us understand better the current dynamic. Now, when we think about the TNI's experience and its role in politics and its involvement with Indonesian society, we have to look without doubt to the separatist movements as one defining factor. Back in the late 1950s, whether it was the Darul Islam rebellion or whether it was the PRRI Pemesta rebellion, or for that matter, the secessionist movement in Maluku. These are all defining movements, not just about the nature of the TNI. It is also these are defining moments in the history of Indonesia, because the role of the military was essentially to stabilize and guarantee kesatuan Republik Indonesia. So this finds, I suppose, a more definitive expression during the Suharto era as the dual function ABRI, dui fungsi ABRI, okay, where the military is not just a defense force, but it is also responsible for social and political stability. And the dui fungsi becomes the ideological definition or the ideological justification for the Suharto regime to include the military in the running of the government administration. So we have to understand from the very beginning that the TNI has a very long history of involvement in non-defense affairs. So this makes it a very unusual institution. If we look at militaries in Southeast Asia, the history of the military's evolution in Singapore, in Malaysia, very different, Myanmar, Thailand, also very different case studies. The Philippines, very different as well. Likewise, under the leadership of the Communist Party in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, very different. So we need to understand the history of the countries to understand the employment of the military, and that gives us a sense of how best to understand the military context in your country. So following the fall of the Suharto era, the TNI formally withdrew from politics and focused on its primary task of external defense. But remember, we have to think about defense in broader terms in the context of Southeast Asia, because the military can be employed for a number of different types of roles. So you have both the military involved in external defense, but you also have the military involved in a wide range of non-defense roles, which we can refer to as military operations other than war. One of the best studies I've read recently on this subject is actually by Dr. Muhammad Haripin from LIPI. He's written a very useful book on military operations other than war, which I would like to commend all of you to read. And it to some extent, it captures the dynamic of the TNI in the post-Suharto era, where you find the TNI being involved in multiple non-defense roles, including counterterrorism, disaster relief, agriculture, and infrastructure development. This, of course, may distract from the military's primary role of preparing for external defense. Now, if you look at all the traditional literature, going back to the 1950s, early 1960s, and the type of literature that came out of the American experience, particularly Samuel Huntington, right? I mean, it's very, the definitive picture you get is a military completely involved in external defense. But that is not the case in this part of the world. So we need to think about how the military has evolved in the context of the nature of its evolution throughout a country's history. And more importantly, in the case of Indonesia, what happened in the context of reformasi and the military's disengagement then from politics. Does that mean it is completely disengaged from the internal context? It is in this context that we need to understand a little bit about the TNI's pivotal role in the COVID-19 pandemic, because it will to some extent also tell us a little bit about how the military continues to evolve as an institution. May I have the next slide, please? Terima kasih. Now, the TNI's role in the COVID-19 pandemic, militaries have been involved. I think if you were to look at statistics and data, right, that are available now, the US military has been probably the most involved military in COVID-19. The statistics indicate that it is employed more frequently than the TNI. Okay, so we are living in very unusual situations, and we really don't know what will happen in the aftermath of the COVID-19 as military role expansion has consequences. Now, when we think about it, the TNI has been involved in the government's efforts to cope with the pandemic since the beginning. Even before the local transmission of COVID-19 cases occurred in Indonesia, the Indonesian government has called upon the TNI to be involved in or to be deployed in military-operated hospitals to evacuate overseas Indonesians, particularly from Wuhan, to prepare isolation facilities and to provide personnel to man these facilities. The TNI also collects donations of medical supplies from neighboring countries. So now these activities all fall under the TNI's military operations other than war. So this is covered under law number 34 of 2004 on the Indonesian Armed Forces. It essentially partitions, this law that is, partitions the TNI core function into combat and non-combat duties. And among the 14 military operations other than war duties listed in the law, the TNI can be called upon for internal security operations. They can be called upon to assist regional governments and the police, as well as support disaster and humanitarian missions. Now, based on historical precedent, I think it's important for us to understand that the TNI has been involved in basically 3 types of military operations other than war. The first would be civic action, such as blood donation activities and rice, the provision of rice. The second would be assistance operations, the transportation of aid during natural disasters, such as the 2004 Aceh tsunami. And third, security operations, such as the patrolling of key installations. Now, as the scale of the health crisis has unfolded in Indonesia, the TNI was integrated into the various national coordinating mechanisms to support government policy. The TNI's role in the pandemic was regulated first by a presidential decision. This is presidential decision number 7, 2020, and presidential decision number 9, 2020 on the COVID-19 task force, and subsequently by presidential regulation number 82, 2020, and presidential regulation number 108, 2020 on the COVID-19 Management Committee and National Economic Recovery. So remember, the TNI's employment here is based on a presidential decision. So it is by civilian fiat. So this is very different from how the TNI would operate in the past. If we were to look at the TNI in the 70s or the 1980s, where there was a certain degree of a culture of impunity. So now the TNI takes its orders from the civilian elite. So both the presidential decisions and the presidential regulations in reality regulate the structure and composition of the National Committee to combat the health and economic aspects of the COVID-19 outbreak. So between March and July 2020, the Assistant for Operations to TNI Commander-in-Chief served as the deputy to the implementing team of the Intergovernmental COVID-19 Task Force. So after the task force was reorganized, the Army Chief of Staff became the deputy head of the COVID-19 Management Committee implementing team. And in order to support the central government's COVID-19 management strategy, TNI formed 4 integrated joint task commands. Komando Tugas Gabungan Terpadu, Kogas Gabungan in March 2020, which worked under the coordination of COVID-19 task force. Their primary role was to organize logistics and rapidly expand the healthcare capacity for COVID-19 isolation and treatment protocols to buffer the healthcare system against the anticipated increase of community infections. So the 4 Kogas Gapad quickly got organized. The first Kogas Gapad was based in Jakarta under the auspices of the Greater Jakarta Regional Military Command, or the Kodam Jaya. It worked hand in hand with various civilian agencies in Wisma Atlet, previously serving as accommodation facilities for athletes, to serve as a government referral hospital for COVID-19. The second Kogas Gapad is located in Natuna Air Base and is led by the 1st Air Force Operations Command, Komando Operasi TNI Angkatan Udara, or KUPSAW. This command runs a quarantine facility at Natuna Air Base. The third Kogas Gapad is based in Sebaru Island, Jakarta, and it is under the management of the Navy's Western First Fleet Command, or Komando Armada, or Co-Armada. The assigned personnel here provide healthcare, and they also maintain an isolation and quarantine facility. Lastly, there is the 4th Kogas Gapad in Galang Island. Now, Galang Island is located just within the vicinity of Kepri, Kepulauan Riau, and this is under the aegis of Kodam 1, Bukit Barisan. This command then manages a specially built hospital and quarantine facilities for COVID-19. The TNI also further expanded its mandate in COVID-19 management after the Jokowi administration implemented large-scale social restrictions. I'm referring to pembatasan sosial berskala besar, the PSBB. To enforce these provisions, TNI personnel was called to assist the police in the enforcement of law and order, and to ensure that COVID-19 health protocols are adhered to. So in June 2020, the TNI commander, Marshal Hadi Cahyanto, stated that TNI Polri personnel would be deployed in around 1,800 spots around the archipelago. And these would include commercial centers, traditional markets, and tourist sites. So the military contribution was roughly in the area of 150,000 troops. Meanwhile, the police dispatched 190,000 personnel. Therefore, in total, there is approximately 360,000 personnel specifically assigned to run the central government's health protocol enforcement program around the country. So finally, the TNI played significant roles to assist elected regional leaders in subnational governments in the handling of the pandemic. For example, ini contoh yang menarik. The Jakarta Provincial Administration regulated TNI involvement through the governor's decision. So interesting, it's through the governor's decision, keputusan gubernur number 328 2020 on DKI Jakarta's COVID-19 Management Acceleration Task Force. So the TNI was embedded as an institution within the government's COVID-19 policy. while of course conducting its own initiatives in managing the pandemic, managing the effect of the pandemic within its own ranks. So the same whole pattern has held nationwide. And according to a study on the regional COVID-19 response, which was, I believe, coordinated recently by CSES, we have learned that TNI officers were listed as deputy chiefs in 1 out of 3 local COVID-19 task forces. The above clearly indicates that the TNI has been instrumental to the national government's efforts to combat COVID-19 in Indonesia. The effectiveness of the TNI's response compared to civilian institutions explains why public trust in the TNI is consistently high. In the latest survey conducted by Lembaga Survey Indonesia, 95% of respondents expressed their trust in the TNI compared to 88% for the president. Okay, very interesting. Do refer to this survey by the Lembaga Survey Indonesia, which was done just recently, 2021. So it's quite fascinating actually to see the high level of public confidence in the TNI. Slide 3, please. Okay, sorry. Now, when we think of the pandemic, we need to think about the issue, while it is critical, it requires us also to study, or it requires us to ask ourselves the question, what is the current state of civil-military relations in Indonesia? This is essentially also the purpose of my, trying to understand the dynamic at this particular time, and of course my major interest in civil-military relations in Indonesia. I think the first thing that we need to do is to analyze for ourselves the extent, to what extent has the military expanded its non-defense role. That's the first thing we need to understand. The second is we need to ask the question, does the scale of the TNI's involvement in the pandemic suggest an unhealthy level of dependence on the part of civilian authorities on the TNI or to the TNI? From a legal perspective, the terms of the TNI involvement in COVID-19 management draws from 2 key pieces of legislation. The first is Article 7 of Law Number 3, 2002 on State Defense, Pertahanan Negara. And this requires that when the TNI needs to be involved in addressing non-military threats, a non-defense government institution must be the leading element. Okay, second, under Law Number 34, 2004 on TNI, the TNI's military operations other than war should take reference from the terms of a state political decision between the president and the parliament. Okay, so how has the Jokowi government essentially performed? If you look at what has happened, the Jokowi government has largely conformed to Law Number 3/2002, placing the TNI in a subordinate role under the leadership of civilian agencies. And this is true at both the national and the subnational level. So while we have seen active TNI officers being involved in COVID-19 management, most of the TNI's role has been concentrated on providing support rather than taking over mitigation efforts from civilian authorities. Then again, I would like to refer to you for all of you to look at this really interesting and very good study done by the CSIS in Jakarta on this particular topic. Particularly look at the writings of Evan Laxmana. However, what I think is troubling that there is not been an official state political decision reflecting the consensus between DPR and the president on the deployment of the TNI in managing COVID-19. So the question that I would like to raise, right, or at least I'm trying to figure out in my mind, is that if you don't have a clear definition on both the scope, time frame, and the duties of the TNI in COVID-19, how does one then define the role of the TNI in the non-defense side of things? Because it does, to some extent, detract it from its primary purpose of preparing for external defense. So this is one aspect that needs consideration. Now, at the same time, the TNI's involvement in virtually all aspects of COVID-19 do highlight a continued dependence of civilian authorities on the TNI's superior organizational capabilities, as well as its logistics and manpower resources. So in contrast, the performance of the Ministry of Health has been, I would say, rather problematic. It was slow to ramp up the COVID-19 swab testing capacity. It was slow to realize funding allocated to it by the national government could be employed, and in this context, employed effectively. And there was essentially, the accuracy of the healthcare data released by the ministry was also problematic. So this raises questions about civilian capacity and whether key ministries are able to lead the national response, effectively. So this, by default, puts the military or makes the military indispensable, to the overall scheme of things, especially in terms of supporting the government in addressing the COVID-19 problem. So I have a few concluding thoughts, and then with that we can move to question and answer session. The TNI has been indispensable to the government's efforts to combat COVID-19 in Indonesia. We have seen retired military officers play key roles in handling the pandemic from within President Jokowi's cabinet, such as the former Lieutenant General Doni Monardo. And we've also seen active military officers being involved as either deputies in local COVID-19 task forces or in organizing medical facilities. Indonesia's limited healthcare infrastructure has no doubt forced the Indonesian government to use the TNI's resources to overcome these limitations. While expedient, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted again to all of us the need to build up state capacity so that the civilian government is not over-reliant on the military. This is helpful because what it will do is it will allow the TNI to focus on its own challenges, in terms of building up its professionalism, and I think they have done a good job here. I think the President Jokowi's administration has put in place some very interesting organizational changes, which will boost TNI professionalism. But also, we think in terms of the relatively deteriorating external defense environment that Indonesia now locates itself in. And it is no longer a benign security environment around the archipelago, particularly around Indonesia's exclusive economic zones. In this context, I'm referring to the area just north of Natuna Island. So the TNI has got significant challenges ahead in terms of securing Indonesia's territorial integrity. So the challenge will be how long can the TNI be used in this kind of role, you see, without compromising the territorial integrity of Indonesia. So it does also require us to ask questions about the state of civilian agencies, you see, and whether this type of situation can continue for the near future. So how to make civilian government less reliant on the military is going to be a real challenge in the years ahead. And I hope this is a topic that some of you attending the seminar would like to study and to invest your time in terms of finding the solution. What is the best balance here in terms of civilian capacity versus the TNI's traditional role. So with that, let me end my presentation and invite questions. Okay, may I go back to Bapak Moderator? Thank you very much. Such a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to the students of Undip, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity and of course the great honor to be involved in physics activities. My thanks again to Bapak Dekan and his colleagues at FISIP Undip. I wish all of you success, good health, and we hope it won't be too long before we can all meet again. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to have this wonderful chance of interacting with the students and faculty of Undip. May God bless all of you.
Thank you, Prof. Leonard, for the really well put presentation. Pak Dekan asked me to tell you that he regretfully has to leave early because he had other events to attend to. So I'm going to kind of sum it up from the presentation of Prof. Leonard. So the TNI or TNI, they have several important roles in tackling this pandemic challenge, such as preparing military operated hospital, evacuating overseas Indonesians from Wuhan, and collecting donations from other countries. They also perform joint task commands under COVID-19 task force and highly involved in the implementation of PSBB or PSBB. And then TNI officers are actively involved in COVID-19 management, yet they have been concentrating on providing support rather than taking over authorities from civilian. I think this needs to be highlighted since it has been kind of an issue from a long time ago about this dui fungsi from our TNI, our APRI at that time. And it concerns a lot of people since they were some concerns about the military would somehow eventually rise up against the civilian government, just like they did in Thailand and Myanmar. But then we need to highlight the facts that they have been really supportive to our civilian authorities, and we kind of rely on them on their superiority organizational capabilities. Yeah, I mean, well, suffice to say that they do have some very strong organizational capabilities. They're highly disciplined. Yeah, so therefore we could say that the TNI are highly indispensable in terms of challenging, taking on the challenge from this COVID-19 pandemic and how we manage them. Okay, thank you again, Pak Leonard. And then we are going to start the Q&A discussion. I invite all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to pose a question to Pak Leonard. You may type your question in the chat box and I will read them, or you could just ask Pak Leonard directly. Is there anyone from the audience who would like to ask Pak Leonard questions? You could raise your hand. Okay, we have, I'm sorry, is this Pak or Bu Mikea?
Mas Mikea, sir.
Oh, Mas, okay then. Okay then, Mas Mikea, go ahead. You may ask your question to Pak Leonard.
Good morning, Pak Leonard. My name is Mikea. I'm from IUP Kelas, University Diponegoro. So I have a question. Sorry, wait a minute. You said that the TNA is indispensable for the Indonesian government to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. The TNA has to establish discipline, right? That's the role of one of the role of the TNA. So how come the Indonesian people are still undisciplined? Like some people don't wear masks, crowded places are not restricted. Is the work of TNA effective? That's my question.
Thank you. It's a very interesting question, Mas Mikea. It's a challenging environment in Indonesia, both for the civil authorities, civilian authorities, as well as for the military authorities. 60% of the Indonesian economy is an economy that is unpredictable in the best of times. People have to work on a day-to-day basis in the informal sector to ensure that they have sustenance, for the days ahead. So it is very challenging. I would be, I have to start from a position of trying to understand the immense challenges facing the civilian authorities on the one hand, but then on the other hand, the military itself, because regardless of how capable the military is, it is not. It is a large institution, no doubt, but it's very difficult to deploy the military in the numbers that is necessary to ensure that everyone in the population is masked. These are issues that I think have to be addressed through other ways. And it's not possible for there to be this sort of monitoring and this sort of surveillance, whether it is by the police or by the military, because the population numbers are just too high. So the question is, how can the government get the message across, on the danger of this pandemic and how important it is for the public to take it seriously. How can the message be gotten across, not just from the national government, but also at all the different levels of the local government? How can social media, the mass media, how can all these elements be utilized, in order to get the message across to people to mask up? And then, of course, how can masks be made readily available for people, to get a hold of, So how can a good subsidized system be put in place to make masks available in and around Indonesia, from the desa level right up to the kota, So it's a big challenge, Maspika. It is a whole of government, a whole of society approach to dealing with this challenge. It cannot just be the TNI. I think the level of trust in terms of the people with the TNI, has to be looked upon in a different way. I don't want to give the impression that the statistics that I quoted from the polling done by the Lembaga Survey Indonesia is is only related to COVID-19. I don't think so. I think when we think in terms of public trust in Indonesia, we have seen this these levels of public trust being very consistent, over a very long period of time. Say, for example, if we take a 10-year period and look at all the polling and surveys done, this is a regular occurrence. By that I mean that the TNI is the most trusted institution in Indonesia. It should not come as a surprise to the people of Indonesia. I mean, because if you look at what the TNI has done, it has made a conscious effort to change its image. I think the senior leadership know and understand public anxiety over the TNI and its past. Excuse me. The TNI still wants to be a relevant institution. It cannot be a relevant institution in this zaman reformasi, right, or zaman demokrasi that Indonesia is now in, without changing its image. So it has put a lot of effort, into this, and I think when we look at public trust in the TNI, you have to look at it in relation to other institutions. Okay, one example I can give you is if we think in terms of the TNI's minimal involvement in graft and corruption cases, as opposed to, say, other institutions like Polri, the DPR, even for that matter, the government's cabinet. So the Indonesian public always tends to view politics in Indonesia as kotor, right? Dirty, because of the nature of the the discoveries of all these graft and corruption cases amongst politicians. But if you look at the TNI, I mean, the TNI is often viewed in public assessment, or at least in public perception, as a clean institution. Okay, so that's how I would look at this situation. How I would answer your question. Okay, Mas Mika, thank you for your question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mas Mika from Faculty of Law, and Leonard for the answer. And then we have another question here, again from the Faculty of Law. This is from Mas Muhammad Akbar. Yeah. So okay. So to his knowledge, the TNI's involvement in the natural disaster management process is in line with Article 7 of the Republic of Indonesia Law Number 34 of 2004. Yeah, concerning the main duties of the TNI, namely military operations apart from war, or we say in bahasa operasi militer selain perang, or MSP, including assisting natural disasters in the emergency response, rehabilitation, and construction. The question is, does the TNI have the capacity and expertise to handle natural disasters, especially COVID-19, considering that the TNI only has experience in disasters other than COVID-19? For example, floods, tsunami, and what have you. So basically he's asking about, is it okay to involve TNI which did not have any relevant experience with pandemic situation, Pak Leonard?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pak Sadwika. Terima kasih Mas Muhammad Akbar atas pertanyaan Anda. I have this thought in my head. I mean, you know, we have the laws, right? I mean, so the laws are very important. They guide us. They provide us with the roadmap in order to figure out how best to employ the TNI in the context of maintaining, you know, civilian authority. So it's quite critical for us to ensure that when the TNI is employed, it is employed by a presidential order. It is employed after a consultation between the executive and the legislative, you know. And in this context, the legal basis is established for its employment. In reality, the employment of the TNI is very much a matter of, you know, I would say mendukung, right? You know, supporting. You know, it's a supporting element now. So it's not there for a particular expertise that it possesses. You know, I think it is there to add capacity to a situation that that bolsters the civilian ability to address a problem. So we should look at the TNI in that context. So does the TNI have the capacity to handle COVID-19? From a medical perspective, it can help primarily because the TNI has a medical corps, you know. So the medical corps can help bolster the civilian medical capability. So ultimately, you have to look at it from that perspective, that there is actually a capacity there, an unused capacity in terms of the TNI medics, you know, the TNI doctors who can be deployed in this context, right, to support the civilian agencies. So in this context, yes, the personnel do exist to support and to help handle the COVID-19 situation. But having said that, it's a support capacity, okay? The responsibility for addressing this problem is really with the Kementerian Kesehatan. Okay, that is where the buck stops there, okay, in relation to dealing with this particular issue. And it is in this context, right, that they operationalize the decrees from the president and also from the local government, because you have the instruksi president, right? But then every locality has its own unique characteristics. So local government has to be involved in the direction of how to address this pandemic. And then the TNI capacity then is to bolster that. It is not to take the lead in managing the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Mas Muhammad Akbar.
Okay, thank you, Pak Leonard, for the answer, and hopefully it answer the question from Mas Muhammad Akbar. And then we have questions from Miss Raisa from Faculty of Law again. Okay, this is quite long, yeah. So the main task of the TNI is to uphold state sovereignty, maintain the territorial integrity of unitary state of Republik Indonesia, and protect the entire nation and all Indonesian bloodshed from threats and interference from outside interference. What do you think is the basis of legal legitimacy that the TNI must also take part in tackling the COVID-19 pandemic? Whereas in the task, it does not say that the TNI should be involved. She's worried that in the future there will be kind of conflict of interest with other institutions. Should we be concerned, Pak Leonard?
Sorry, Pak Sadwika, can you repeat on system?
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay, I'm going to make the short version. Yeah. So basically, she's asking about should we be worried that in the future there will be conflicts of interest with other institutions?
I see. Yes. What you're asking. I think conflicts of interest is definitely going to be, will be there. So it's very important for the TNI to be observant about, must be certain that there is a legal basis to what he is doing. So he cannot act on his own inclinations, you know. So the question is, there must always be when a particular situation arises. The question has to be decided now as to what does the law say, you know. So I think now for TNI officers, all of them have to be very well versed with this, you know, in terms of understanding where their position lies, whether they have a legal basis to exercise their role in a particular function, particularly once it crosses into the civilian realm. The reason why I say this is because the police also have a role. In many instances, the role of the police and in internal affairs, and of course, you know, the TNI has had such a long history of involvement in internal affairs. Sometimes it's hard to get a sense of who is responsible for what, you know. So especially as Pak Sadwika has mentioned a very important term there, operasi militer selain perang, okay, military operations other than war. It's very important to define clearly what those areas are, you know, and how then will the military be employed. What is the role of the military? What is the role of the police? This is where the role of the president is very critical, because the president is in reality the supreme commander of the armed forces. So the president has to set the tone, has to provide guidance in consultation with parliament, you know, and on that basis, they are on a very firm ground as to what their engagement will be in a particular civilian work, you know, or a particular civilian an activity that is seen in the civilian realm. So it is very important, you know, for the TNI to get that assurance before embarking on any activity. Otherwise, it runs the risk of people raising a lot of questions about the motives behind the military. What is the ambitions of the commander, in this context? Why this deployment? For what purpose? And remember, we always must understand that there must be some understanding of how to deploy the military, but to also for what period of time to deploy the military. It cannot go on in perpetuity, So it's very important. And now I think the role of civilians is very critical in Indonesia. That's why, I would encourage all of you here, students, mahasiswa dan mahasiswi, it's important for you to understand defense. I think one of the weakest institutions in Indonesia is Komisi 1 in Parliament, because Komisi 1, it has an oversight role, has a regulatory role as well, but very few parliamentarians who are part of Komisi 1 have expertise in defense and security, so it's very important for this type of expertise to be built up at the university level, so I hope when it comes to public administration, part of the curriculum will also be, civil military relations. I think it's very important for students to learn this and understand this area, because who knows, one day you might become staff ahli, to a parliamentarian, either at the local level or at the national level. And it's very important to sort of provide good advice, you see. Right now, I think it's very limited, the pool of people in Indonesia who actually understand civil military relations. It's very important in Indonesia, primarily because the military has a very long history of socio-political involvement, So the onus is, remember, onus is on the civilian side. It's not on the military side. Militaries can sometimes be opportunistic institutions because they have tremendous power. They hold a gun, remember. So the situation of the civilian being dependent on the military is never going to go away in Indonesia. So the problem sometimes is the civilians drawing the military into the political fray. This is what General Nasution tried way back in 1958 to try to differentiate. You see, that's why he came up with this. Filsafannya jalan tengah tentera. So it is the army's middle way, jalan tengah tentara. So it is to ensure that the military stays above the fray. It doesn't get involved in politics. So it's incumbent on the civilians to be very careful about how they draw the military into a socio-political activity. Okay, that's my answer. Thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Leonard. Okay, next we have Mr. Gafar. You might ask Pak Leonard directly.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Satya. Good morning, Pak Leonard. My name is...
Selamat pagi, Pak Gafar.
Pagi. My name is Gafar. Now, I'm studying in Indonesia Defense University, an institution that you have big contribution in there. And my question is... civil society seems reluctant to the involvement of TNI in COVID-19 and other non-traditional security issues. But I think it must be noted that in the US, the military has been utilized in several non-traditional issues, security issues too, like disaster management, like Hurricane Katrina and many other in the US. And like in Indonesia, according to Gallup survey in 2016, the U.S. military was considered as the most trusted institution in there. So I think there is a same line with Indonesian military, that this institution gained the highest public trust from the people or from the society. I think so. This is such a dilemma for TNI when they are not being deployed for certain traditional security problems such as war. So what will they do while they still also receive funding from the government? And maybe people want TNI to join or to be more outward looking. If we consider now TNI is more inward looking. But in the South China Sea conflict, I read the Pak Emirza Shailendra paper about non-balancing act Indonesia. And in his paper, it is noted that the army or Angkatan Darat is so resistant to the China's aggressivity. It means that Indonesian military has the willingness to or encountering China, or they want to be more outward looking rather than inward looking. And we can see that TNI has very hard history. But central government, according Pak Emirza Shailendra again, especially Pak Jokowi, tends to be more calm in responding China's aggressiveness. So I think, so what is the solution? Then TNI. Thank you.
Okay, wah, menarik pertanyaan anda, Pak. Okay, there's quite a bit to unpack there, Pak. Sorry, there's something wrong with the sound system. Hopefully that will be resolved, but I think it's slowly coming together, Pak. Yeah, I think it's. I thank you very much, Pak, for your interesting question. Yeah, you know, IDU has a very important role ahead to help us also understand Indonesia's defense and security thinking about the future. You know, I think. You know, we are always have to sort of understand better the nature of the strategic environment that surrounds us. If we go back to Indonesia's history, Indonesia is what I would call has a benign security environment. You know. If you look at the northern approaches, the eastern approaches, the western approaches, the southern approaches, tidak ada ancaman. You know, there is no threat. You know, to Indonesia. Indonesia's concern has always been the greater Southeast Asia. You know, how could challenges to regional security impact Indonesia? And Indonesia has ASEAN, you know, and ASEAN plays a very important role in the context of Indonesia's forward defense. So in that context, diplomacy is the first line of defense for Indonesia. To a certain extent, what this did was it actually reduced the need for Indonesia to be outward looking, from a purely defense perspective. The other issue, which I think also is a problem that still till today has not been resolved, is the nature of security thinking in Indonesia. Security thinking in Indonesia is very much inward looking. The TNI is actually a people's army. So it is, if you look at the ini konsepsi lamanya, sistem pertahanan rakyat semesta. So if you look at the Indonesian defense doctrine, these are all very inward-looking doctrines. See, this is the problem, I think, with the way in which reform took place back in 1998. The people who were responsible for reform focused very much on the political side and the legal side. And this has a lot to do with the fact that, the aid agencies that provided the expertise really drew their expertise from Europeans, specifically from Germany, from Switzerland, who focus very much on security sector reform. And the focal point for security sector reform has always been, if you think about the fall of communism in Europe, right? What do you do with the militaries of the Eastern European communist countries? But the premise is actually all wrong, to employ it in Indonesia, because the Communist Party has always been dominant, so it has always been civilian control over the military in Eastern Europe. So the security sector reform ideas, when they were transplanted to Indonesia, really focus only on the political and legal realm. There was no expertise on the defense side of things. So if you're going to change the orientasi of the TNI, you have to look at the doctrine. So since 1998, nobody has actually looked at the doctrine. So how can the doctrine then be rescoped to include an external dimension to it? Now the doctrines are all internally focused. So, okay, if your doctrine is internally focused, which organization then is primary? The army is primary. Okay, so when you think about ancaman is from the perspective of the army, not the navy, not the air force. Okay, so if you go back now to Pak Amirza's article on non-balancing, I think one of the points that Pak Amirza is trying to make is that the Angkatan Udara and the Angkatan Laut have a completely different perception. Their orientation is external. TNI Angkatan Darat is internal. But TNI Angkatan Darat is the most dominant of the three services. Okay, so this predetermines actually the Indonesian approach to doctrinal matters, particularly military doctrine. Okay, so the military doctrine is very internally focused, But the question I think now TNI has to ask itself is, can it continue on this, to continue thinking this way when the strategic environment for Indonesia is no longer benign? You see? So it's a big challenge, So maybe, I think one day, Pak Ghaffar, I hope IDU will, provide us with some new thinking on this issue to guide us, help us understand how, how doctrinal evolution can take place in Indonesia. Because right now, I think a lot of the orientation of the Angkatan Darat is still inward looking, you know. So until that changes, we will not sort of see any change in the nature of the TNI's understanding of its strategic environment. Okay, thank you, Pak Gafar. Very interesting question.
Okay, thank you, Pak Leonard. We all still have several questions. Please bear with us. Yeah, next one is from Miss Rosemary from Faculty of Law. She's asking, is there a possibility for abuse of power that could be done by TNI in their duty during this COVID-19? Is the regulation that they use is strict enough to prevent the case of abusing of power?
Yes, thank you very much, Ibu Rosemary. I appreciate your question. Of course, there's always a possibility. There's always a possibility, you know. But very hard to see how that can happen at the national level. I think the greater worry would be at the local level, you know. But I think the good thing that came out of Reformasi is the growth of civil society, the role of different NGO groups, you know, I guess the activism of Indonesian youth, you know. I mean, Indonesian youth, I mean, I guess, you know, if you think about it, budaya pemuda Indonesia, I mean, going back to the zaman kemerdekaan, right? I mean, has always been, you know, an activistic one, you know. So we also saw that in the Reformasi era, which I believe still continues, you know. And I think it is magnified now because of the use of social media, with Facebook and Twitter being so popular. Forums and platforms and mediums, you know, for the Indonesian youth to utilize. So I think if you see this kind of culture of impunity manifests itself in Indonesia through excessive action by the TNI, it can be captured, you know, through public anger and public response to these sorts of irregularities. In many instances, abuse of power can be captured also through YouTube videos, you know. I mean, we've seen that in Papua, right? So it's very difficult now for the TNI to do things and get away with it, because everything can be captured, you know. I still remember just recently I gave a presentation to the PBNU on Islam Nusantara, and you know, during the waktu pertanyaan, there was actually somebody out in the asking me question who is in the kebun, and behind him I saw a kambing walking, you know. So you can see the social media penetration in Indonesia is so vast, you know. So I think if I'm a TNI officer, TNI soldier, I'd be very careful in terms of what I would do, and I would definitely not attempt to abuse power, because it can be easily captured, you know, and it can easily this kind of problem can manifest itself in very complicated manners, you know. I mean, it's very easy for a social movement to be mobilized, you know, for activism to take off on the social media, you know. So the perpetrators of such irregularities can face significant sanction. So yeah, the operating environment now is very different from the 1970s and the 1980s. So it's not a big issue for me. Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you, Pak Leonard. Again, we still have quite a few questions, and those are all equally interesting. Next one is from Mr. Andri Rahmat Hidayat from Public Administration, batch 2020. How the TNI adapt during COVID-19 pandemic to I think he was going to try to say, to make good governance in Indonesia, like how exactly the TNI adapt and contribute to the good governance in Indonesia during COVID-19.
Thank you, Pak Hidayat. A very nice question. I think how the TNI contributes to good governance during COVID-19 is for it to ensure that everything it does follows closely the rule of law. By that I mean, what are the rules of engagement? How is it to be employed? Where are its limits? That is good governance, from the context of how we look at the TNI. This also will be an indication of TNI professionalism, how it has evolved over the years. So the TNI can come out of this with tremendous credit to itself. So that's a separate thing. But then, how can the TNI contribute to good government is another thing, another question. Okay, another point. So good governance, I think, relates more to the TNI and its performance. In terms of observing all the norms, the rules, and the structures that pertain to its employment in the field. Good government is very important too. How Indonesia is going to get out of this also depends on the capability and the capacity of the government. So how does the TNI contribute to enhancing the capacity of the government to meet the needs of the people of Indonesia at this troubled time is very, very critical. Okay, so the employment of the TNI's assets, the employment of the TNI's skills, especially the deployment of its personnel to bolster the civilian capacity at this time is very important, because what it will do is it will raise the capability of the government, and to some extent, I think if the government performs well, it will show the government in a good light. Particularly, I guess, we wait to see how long this pandemic takes to be eradicated. Well, I don't think it'll ever be eradicated, but how long it takes to manage it, and to get it under control. That will indicate quite significantly also the progress made by the Jokowi government and increase public confidence in the government as well. So how TNI can contribute to good government is also an important factor. Okay, so governance and government, two dynamics here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Leonard. I think we are going to finish by 11 a.m. here, so I guess it's 12 p.m. there. So maybe yes. Just one more question, maybe, Pak Leonard. Is it okay?
Boleh. Silakan, Pak.
Okay, then. Yeah, here we have Miss Bernadetta Karina, from Public Administration, batch 2020. Despite the significant roles of the individual retired and active duty officers have played in the management of COVID-19, the TNI as an organizational actor is not yet fully mobilized to take over civilian policy decision-making and the implementation during this pandemic. The question is, how militarized is Indonesia's handling of the COVID-19 management? Like, I think she was trying to ask how militarized we have been so far, and should we be more militarized in terms of handling this pandemic, Pak Leonard?
Sorry, Pak, can you repeat the question again? There was something wrong with the transmission.
Okay, so basically here Miss Bernadetta, she asked about how militarized is Indonesia's handling the COVID-19 management so far, and maybe could we be more militarized, or do we need to be more militarized in handling the COVID-19 management?
Okay, I see. Okay. Terima kasih, Pak Bernadetta. Yeah, very interesting. I think militaristic. It's a good description. It's hard to yeah. You see, for me. I would look at it perhaps differently because of my own personal experience. Growing up in a very different setting in Singapore, because the role of the military here is different from the role of the military in Indonesia. So, of course, I understand your heightened concern about militarism, and the fear of militarism. And the worry that militarism might return back to Indonesia because of lack of controls or excessive expansion of the military's role, and then following that a lack of willingness or on the part of the civilian government to return the military back to its normal position. So I can understand, these are challenges that are there and have to be taken seriously, because the situation can become very complicated in the future if no clear exit strategy is put in place. So it's very important for civilian government to always remember the history of the country, to be clear about what its obligations are to the people of Indonesia on the one hand, and what are its what the law requires it to do in regard to its relationship with the military. The problem for government in Indonesia, both at the national and the local level, is this desire to bolster government capacity by the use of the military. That tendency must be carefully utilized. This is an emergency situation, COVID-19. We've never seen anything like it. My generation, your generation. I mean, historically, this is a period of time that we are living through that, is just out of the ordinary, unusual. So we are trying all kinds of different approaches, all sorts of different strategies, in order to reduce the potency of this pandemic, and allow us to return back to normal life in some way. So this does mean that we have to use all the assets in the country that can be used to fight this. So it's not just the issue of the military being deployed in military situations or defense situations. It's also the use of the military in non-military situations, and the great capacity of the military and the discipline of the military, right, can be utilized to really bolster the civilian government's ability to address this. But we take this as not the norm, but we take this as an emergency, keadaan darurat, so this means that extraordinary times require extraordinary measures. But this cannot be the plan for the future, I think this is something that the people of Indonesia must think about. You have a very good institution as the TNI. Now, how do you use it for the benefit of the people? You see, so but we must also remember that elites can be self-serving in their approach. So there's always a desire of the elites to want to use the military for their own purposes. Now, just in case any of y'all thought that this is a uniquely Indonesian problem, I think we have just seen in the United States that it is also an American problem. It is no country is immune from these sorts of things. Whether you're an old democracy or whether you're a new democracy, the tendency to utilize the military for power, to bolster one's own power, is always there. So we need to rein it in, so it's very important now for firstly to put the laws in place, right? Secondly, I think to think about, well, what about doctrine? Should there be a good discussion about doctrine? And what should doctrine constitute in this day and age? And then, of course, it's important to build up the professionalism of the military. So I think, most of the officers in the TNI want to be professional. I don't believe that they want to be looked upon as poor exponents of their skill. If you're a Coast Guard officer, if you're a Kopassus officer, if you're an Air Force pilot, if you're a captain of a ship in the Navy, you want to be known as a professional, a skilled professional in your job. You don't want to be involved in politics. It is not the right thing. So the thing about what needs to be done now is, how do you help how can the TNI be helped to maintain its professional direction? Okay, so it's not just a TNI problem; it's a national problem, and the solutions must come from the political office holders themselves, to say, well, we will not disturb the TNI. Yeah, jangan mengganggu TNI. If you know what I mean. Leave them alone, to concentrate on developing their professional role, because the threats to Indonesia are going to be very complex in the 21st century. We have a multipolarity emerging now in this part of the world. New powers emerging. As the pole now moves from Europe and the Americas to the Asia Pacific or the Indo-Pacific, the security challenges for a country like Indonesia is going to be very significant. We should leave the TNI to do their job and to become experts at doing their job, and not to draw them into politics unnecessarily. We must try to make sure that the profession of the military retains its position of importance in modern day society. Those are. I will leave with those 3 points. Yeah, thank you very much for such an enjoyable and such a very interesting session. Ya, saya harap kita dapat berjumpa langsung di kesempatan yang akan datang. Dengan begitu juga Ya, begitu saya juga bisa atau saya harap makan sate sapi Pak Kempleng lagi dengan Pak Dekan, Pak Sadbika dan teman-teman saya di Undip yang so nice. I enjoy this place in Ungaran. I always ini mimpi saya lah Pak. I keep thinking of it all the time.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Leonard. We have Pak Fendi here. Maybe Pak Fendi would like to say something to Pak Leonard.
Halo Pak Fendi, nice to see you Pak Fendi.
Yeah, halo Pak Leonard. Thank you so much Pak Satya. Yeah, I hope that we can meet up here in Semarang, Pak Leonard, and then with Sate Pak Kempleng again. But I think it's also interesting discussion that we had. But I think it would be more interesting actually the main question, why it has to be TNI again? Why it has to be TNI, not Polri? I think it's going to be more interesting in other topics that we are going to discuss, whereby it is kind of balancing for Pak Jokowi for playing the role between TNI and Polri. I think that's a new issues, and especially when we see about Indonesian politics. But thank you so much, Pak Leonard, for your presentation. I think it's will be interesting for all of our students here. Then hopefully we can meet up soon. Thank you, Pak Leonard. Thank you, Pak Satya.
Thank you, Pak Fendi. Very thoughtful of you.
Yeah, maybe we can ask Pak Amni to make the next session, next guest lecture for Pak Leonard for another topics. Thank you sekali lagi Pak Leonard, makasih banyak atas kehadirannya. Maybe we can have photo session. I'm inviting all of the participants, ladies and gentlemen, to turn your camera on so we can have photo session. Pak Amni yang memotret siapa?
Mbak Naya.
Oke, Mbak Naya sudah standby?
Sudah, Pak.
Oke, dihitung ya, silakan.
Oke, sebentar. Ini belum semuanya on cam sih, Pak.
Okay, please do not be shy. It's not every day you can take a picture with Pak Leonard because kind of far away and it's still a while. It would be a while for him to come visit us again. So please turn your camera on so we can have photo session. Oke, langsung aja, Mbak Naya, silahkan.
Tunggu Pak, sebentar. Oke, saya hitung ya. 1, 2, ini.
Oke, mungkin ada page berikutnya yang belum masuk, Naya.
Oke.
Bisa lagi mungkin?
Baik,
ya, oke.
Teman-teman tolong on cam ya. Oke. Ini. Oke, 1, 2, 3. Sebentar, lagi. 1, 2, 3. Udah, Pak.
Okay, I think that's all ya. Thank you, Mbak Naya. Okay, then thank you again, Pak Leonard, for being here virtually. Again, we are really hoping that we would be able to see you again really soon and have those delicious sate kempleng with you. Because to be honest,
sate kambing, Pak Leonard. Sate kambing.
Ya, sate kambing, Pak.
Atau sate sapi juga. Juga saya suka makan, Pak.
Yeah. Okay, then I think that is all for today. I give the time back to Ms. Naya as the MC to close the event. Thank you again, Pak Leonard, very much.
Terima kasih,
for
Pak.
having us here. Oke, silakan Mbak Naya ditutup.
That is all for today. Thank you very much for all of our participants, and thank you, Pak Leonard, for
Thank you.
joining our
Thank you, Pak.
discussions. Yeah, we sincerely hope that you had a good time and learned something new. See you next time on another webinar, and have a good day.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Leonard.
Terima
Terima
kasih.
kasih.
Thank you
Terima
very
kasih,
much.
Pak.
kasih Pak Leonard.
Sampai ketemu lagi.
Terima kasih Mas Amni, Pak Satya, Pak Leonard.
Terima kasih.
Atentif ya.
Ibu, betul Bu Yuni.
Ya.
Terima kasih Mas Amni atas undangannya dari Fakultas Hukum.
Makasih Bang Azhar.
Terima kasih Pak.
Terima kasih.